Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is the 2007 GRA Tag Business Launch Competition. Just to bring you up to date on where we are, we have 4 early-stage Georgia technology companies who are presenting today. They each get 20 minutes to give their business cases, their value propositions. And after that, then our esteemed panel of judges, all experts in different areas, many of them related directly to these companies, ask their questions that are designed to fill in any gaps of information that might exist in the presentation that they had just heard. We have 4 companies that are presenting today. We've got 2 of them out of the way. We got number 3 about to happen at 6 o'clock Eastern tonight. The judges will have tabulated all of their scores, and we will present the winner with about $300,000 in cash and services, certainly enough to get a company airborne very quickly. Well, as I mentioned, we're about to welcome the 3rd of the 4 companies. This is Integrated Software Systems. This company is web-based invoices for the construction industry to provide real-time records and eliminate printed documents. So, from Integrated Software Systems, please welcome Bakari Brooks.
Thank you. Thank you. And on behalf of Integrated Software Systems, I just want to say that we're absolutely thrilled that we have this opportunity to present before this distinguished panel of judges. So without further ado, I'd like to present Integrated Software Systems. Essentially, Integrated Software Systems is an Atlanta-based development company, and we are focusing on optimizing the payment processing for the trillion-dollar construction industry, arguably the largest industry in the country, if not the world. So how are we going to do it? First, I want to draw a parallel before I demonstrate the opportunity. Essentially, each of you live in a home, and at some point you had a vision for what that house was going to look like, and you hired a general contractor to actually build that house. And that general contractor hired different subcontractors to do various components of it. Some to put carpet, some to paint the walls, some to put the roof in, all these various components. And every single month, each of those subcontractors, obviously they need to get paid for the work they put in place. So they submit a bill to that general contractor. The general contractor then reviews that bill. They either agree or disagree with the work. More often than not, they don't agree. And they kind of work back and forth, negotiate a value that they both feel represents the work in place. And then they allow those subcontractors to be included in the overall bill. Once all of those subcontractors have been included in this comprehensive bill, that's presented to you, the owner of the house, the person who has the vision. And then you look over that bill and you say, well, I agree with this component or I don't agree with this component. And again, there's a back and forth between you and that general contractor. And ultimately, when all parties have accepted it and everyone signed off on it, it's presented to the bank and the funds are dispersed and everyone's happy. Essentially, what our model will do is apply that same concept but to the commercial construction industry. Now, unlike your house example, where there's probably maybe 5 or 10 subcontractors, you're talking about an industry where there's 20 to 30 separate subcontractors billing in excess of $500,000, $750,000, sometimes $1 million every single month. It's a very labor-intensive process, and I kind of walk you through that process and then introduce the solution as we see it. There's several components that make up the payment process in the construction industry. Essentially, the first component, as I alluded to in that example, is the submission. This is when all the subcontractors, of which there are 20 to 30 separate subcontractors, around the same period in time, submit their bills to the general contractor. It's a very labor-intensive process. You have to usually balance that information versus previous data. You have to allocate the cost correctly, and you have to submit it in a certain format. When you put in all the labor hours for all of those 20 to 30 subs, it's about 50 labor hours or about $9,000 in just labor costs for these subcontractors to get a bill to the general contractor. Now, once the general contractor has this bill, this is where the robust portion of the process starts. The reviewing, the revising, and the resubmittal. I've been doing this for more than 10 years. It will cause you to lose your hair. Because what actually happens is you have all of these subcontractors during a 2 or 3 day period vying for your attention to get paid. They often do not submit in the right format, even though you ask them time and time again, please submit in this format. They do not have the right calculations. Usually their previous data is wrong, and you have to go through, you got to pull your files, you have to look back to see if the previous draw matches the current one. It's very labor intensive. The general contractor usually has a project manager and an accountant that's just staring at this stuff for hours every single month. And when you add in the total labor hours to just review these draws, revise them, and resubmit them, you're talking about 91 labor hours. That's about $16,000 every single month just for these individuals to go back and forth. And oftentimes, there's a disagreement with the value. So again, you have to be able to track that back and forth. And how they do it right now is they put a little pen mark through a value and say, this is what I need it to be. Fax it, and that goes back and forth. When all of that is done, and everyone has agreed upon the value, well, now the poor general contractor has got to compile all of those values into an owner bill. So now they're going to turn around and they've got to cost allocate every single one of those 30 separate draws. And then you have to put your fees and your overhead and your cost on top of it. So that takes about 8 exhausting hours because that's a labor-intensive process. There's no automation to that. You basically are taking these paper documents and you're manually putting them into a spreadsheet. And you have to allocate the cost in that spreadsheet, and you have to make sure it's in the right format. So finally, you have all these separate subcontractors with an agreed upon value. You've created an owner bill. Now you have to submit that owner bill to the owner, and now the owner is going to review it. But in this example, the owner's got consultants, an architect, an engineer, the bank rep, a whole host of folks that have to review this too. And they may agree or not agree. And then you have to go back and forth between the general and the owner. That's about 4 hours of total labor costs, or about $1,000 a month, just in reviewing this stuff, resubmitting it. Finally, when everyone is all finished and everyone has agreed upon the value, then you have to wait for original documents. That, believe it or not, can take 2-3 days, because now you have to make sure those original documents balance to what you agreed upon. You have to wait for an original signature with a notary, and there's about 6 labor hours of processing time associated with that. So when you add it all up, ladies and gentlemen, that's 30 to 45 days just to process one draw request. That's close to $30,000 a month just in total labor costs from all the subcontractors, from the general, from the owner, all of those folks. And it is a burden on the labor costs and the overhead for that project. So what integrated software systems is going to do is completely wipe away that conventional thought process. This 38 average days of processing time, which is manual, multiple formats, it's very inefficient, costs close to $30,000 in overhead. We're going to wipe that away, and we're going to create eBill. And what eBill is, it's going to offer real-time processing. Everyone is going to submit their draw request through our portal. And our portal is going to allow automatic real-time processing. It's going to have a universal interface. We will automatically certify and authenticate every single user. And under the 2001 Digital Signature Act, the courts recognize, banks recognize, financial institutions recognize digital signatures as the same as a wet signature. So now you don't have to wait on original documents anymore. So you cut your processing time from about 38 days to about 6 days, from about $30,000 to about $3,000. But most importantly, the most valued asset on a construction project is that project manager and that superintendent. They are doing what that developer has hired that contractor to do, which is manage construction. They're not stuck in the minutia associated with this draw process. So what makes integrated software systems unique enough to solve this problem? What's our secret sauce, if you will? Well, I mentioned earlier, I have about more than 10 years of experience just in owning this process. When you do, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And no matter how many different ways I tried to make it more efficient, I still was in there on Sunday nights, Saturday nights, pulling my hair out, just trying to get things to balance. So my experience alone just in owning it is a major secret sauce for this company. The industry is clearly showing a shift, especially over the last 10 years, to web-based solutions. Construction is a very slow adopter to technology. But fortunately for us, we are now at the tail end of that adoption, where a lot of these companies, they're reaching out. They're seeking solutions. We spoke to numerous developers, numerous general contractors, numerous subs. They're looking for anything that's going to give them a competitive edge. We have an experienced and influential advisory board. Notably, Mr. Hilton Smith, who's an executive vice president with Turner Construction, he has seen this concept. Turner is arguably the largest domestic construction company in the country. When he saw this concept, he said, when you guys are ready, we're going to fly you to New York, and we're going to sit you in front of the CIO and the CEO, and we're going to recommend that they test this and they consider this because, again, it's cost and time savings. Secondly, our secret sauce lies in our patent-pending intellectual property. We've protected this concept, and we filed about last year, and we intend to file for our final patent towards the end of this year. So how does all this translate into a market? Essentially, the non-residential general commercial construction market, in 2006, there was over 138,000 projects in the country alone. Construction is one of those industries where about 64% of those projects are managed by the top 100 general contractors. So essentially, we can just focus our attention on those top 100, and that's 64% of that market. Now, when you look at the entire market, with those average of 20 to 30 subcontractors in every one of those 138,000 projects, that's 2 million billings every single month. That's 24 million billings every single year. So since we're a subscription-based model, that represents an order of magnitude of about $1 billion a year for integrated software systems. So obviously, when you look at a market and you look at a solution, there's obviously going to be competition. And there's really two components that we've looked at, and we studied a lot of the software manufacturers out there. And to be honest with you, there are hundreds of construction software manufacturers out there. And there's really two components we focused on. The first component is leveraging your customer's existing infrastructure. How well does your product work with the customer's existing software applications? The second component is how well do you process in real time payments? So let's take a look at the higher level companies that are out there that are potential competitors. CMS and Primavera on the lower left portion of that graph, they really focus on scheduling and estimating software. They aren't a direct competitor, but obviously they're in the construction industry and they have construction software. So they can ramp up and become a potential competitor. Meridian Systems produces a product called Prolog. The founder of that company used to work for Turner Construction, and they really focus on construction management tools. They don't really focus on accounting. Autodesk recently acquired Constructware, a local Atlanta company, for about $35 million. Again, they focus on construction management software. Sage acquired arguably the largest accounting software manufacturer, Timberline, in the construction industry. And on the payment side, Newbridges, Harbor Payments, Textura, they all do invoice processing. They do payment processing. They focus on broad industries, and Textura focuses on the construction industry. However, they do not leverage clients' existing infrastructure. So what that means is everybody in the entire supply chain of that project has got to use that system. It's just not feasible to get every single person using that system. So where eBill is set aside is we leverage clients' existing infrastructure, and we have the most sophisticated real-time processing. We offer the only company, and this is what our patent is based on, that tracks line item negotiation. So now a developer doesn't need to hire an audit company because we guarantee our calculations. We track every single time a value has been negotiated, and that is invaluable assets to the developer. So you know from any given moment what was originally requested versus what was approved. We have our digital certification and authentication is bar none in compliance with the 2000 Act of the Digital Signatures. We also allow instant split screen analysis. So instead of me going to my accountant and saying, bring out the boxes and pull out these draws and put this draw next to this draw and a ruler, now I just go into the screen, I say, I want to compare this to a previous draw, and automatically compares it, significantly saving you time. So how does this business model work? I mentioned earlier that 64% of the total market of non-residential is controlled by the top 100 contractors. So we're going to focus our customer acquisition on those general contractors. They're not going to have to pay for this system. The developer's not going to have to pay for the system. Why? Because that's the carrot. That's the carrot to require the subs to use the system. It's minimal implementation costs to the general contractors, and we'll be able to backwards integrate into their existing systems. We will partner with programs such as Timberline so that we can interface with them. We're not trying to replace what customers are using. We're trying to supplement it and give them this tool that they need. In turn, the general contractor will contractually obligate subs to use this. They'll be able to online activate the account. We'll have monthly subscription programs, quarterly programs, annual programs, and it'll be a scalable model. So when you combine those two components, it's strong growth, it's revenue growth, and it's strong operating leverage. So as our revenues are increasing, our expenses, for all intents and purposes, are remaining flat. So that's increased gross margin as we bring in every more dollar into the company. Again, 24 million billings every year, that's $1 billion in sales revenue potential for integrated software systems. So let's talk a little bit about our management team. I'm the president and founder of Integrated Software Systems. I founded it in 2004. Like I said, I've got over probably 15 years of experience just in construction billing, construction management, and real estate development. Chuck Newton, who is the Executive Vice President of Operations, is a commissioned lieutenant officer in the Naval Reserves, and actually, or National Reserves rather. He just came back from Iraq, and he's a logistics manager over there, and he's responsible for about 66 soldiers, and they're responsible for supporting about a brigade of about 4,500 troops. So Chuck's core competency is in operations. He works for a Fortune 500 company now, and he oversees logistical operations. Eric Smith is just brilliant when it comes to code and technology. The way he sees and he visions technology, it's all a function of his experience. He's got over 10 years of experience working for a Fortune 500 company, leading teams, starting hundreds of millions of dollars worth of internet billing systems from nothing to something. And our board of advisors, which we're very proud of, I mentioned earlier the executive vice president with Turner Construction. We have a vice president with Bank of America, and we've got a vice president, Bob, out of Pittsburgh with Mellon Bank. Has very close ties to UPS. And not a lot of people realize this, but UPS is probably one of the most premier developers in the country. They do a lot of development. And then Lisa, an architect out of an architectural firm in Pittsburgh, has been instrumental in getting us focused with the application so it works with the consultants and the development side. So, and just want to touch briefly upon the financial highlights. Essentially, we are here today for the simple fact that this business launch competition is going to provide us the catalyst to take this company to the next level. The money and the services that are afforded should we win this competition is going to allow us to take the product and test it in a local market. We've already have commitments from a $500 million developer here in the Southeast. So this money essentially is going to carry us through the next 4 to 5 months of testing it in the market. So we can make tweaks, we can make adjustments, approach venture capitalists towards the end of the year, and prepare to launch at the beginning of 2008. In 2008 through 2010, the first 3 years, we plan on aggressively targeting 17 of those top 100 contractors and slowly but surely bringing all of their projects online into our system. So we'll grow the company from about 230,000 in sales to about 11 million in sales by the end of the third year. And just to touch upon a couple of the schedule milestones and highlights, we've been spending the last year or two really focus grouping with developers and contractors and developing this concept. It is about 98% finished. We've got some final tweaks. We've already got our commitment from the developer to test this, and we're going to start testing in the next month or two for about 3 or 4 months, and we'll do some modifications. And then we're going to launch at the beginning of the year. We've raised over $120,000 to date. That's mainly from angel investors, friends and families, and we're very excited about that. And from a timing of funding, we need about $150,000 now to get us through the beta testing and through modifications. And then as we begin to ramp up towards the end of this year, we're going to approach VCs for about $3 million. And at the end of the following year, about $2 million for our growth phase. So in summary, I want to leave you with 3 points. The first point is this is a proprietary patent pending hosted solution. Second point is the experienced management team and very influential advisory board is going to be critical to bringing this company to success. But really what I want to focus on is the business model and the operating leverage. There are two factors that will make or break any construction project. You ask any developer, it's time and it's money. And if you can save a developer time and you can save a developer money and they don't have to pay for it, they're all over it. Because they have got to protect their most valued asset, which is that project manager and that superintendent, and let them do what they have been put in that position to do, which is manage construction. Thank you very much, and I'd like to bring up Eric and Chuck for our question and answer period.
Appreciate it. All right, you ready for cross-examination?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's go. Folks, who's first? Dr. Glassman.
Thank you. A question about how you're going to get the subcontractors to agree to participate in this. If I understood you correctly, currently companies can't get them to use the formats that you want. Mm-hmm. So what is it that's going to incent them to participate in e-bill?
Right. There's actually two things that's the carrot. Number one, the contractual obligation. If they are under contractual obligation by the general contractor to use a certain system, they have to use it. But the reality is the contractual obligation is only to get traction in the industry. Once subcontractors are using this and they see, wait a minute, we're getting paid faster and there's less headache with submitting it, they're going to want this product irrespective of a contractual obligation. So it's really those two components. Did that answer your question?
Why isn't there a contractual obligation to use the formats?
Well, you see, the challenge is the format, there is a contractual obligation for them to submit draw requests. The problem is there's no systems out there that they can require the subcontractors to use to ensure that information is accurate. All they can do is say you need to submit on an AIA form or in this Excel template, but that doesn't mean that there's not going to be errors in that. And that's really where the breakdown is they may submit in the correct written format, okay, but that doesn't mean that there's not going to be a ton of errors on that bill.
Thank you.
Stuart.
Bakari, I thought you did a really nice job.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
And it's certainly defining or articulating the issue as it relates to the construction
Thank you.
Industry, your expertise. There's a lot of industries out there with similar problems. Okay, you could make analogies to the healthcare industry, other billing, just where reconciliation, reporting is an issue. Have you thought about down the road how leverageable this might be or scalable that this model may be to other applications or other verticals? And if you have, give me some of your thoughts on that.
Actually, it's interesting you mentioned healthcare because there's really four industries. Healthcare was one of them. And believe it or not, in addition to healthcare, the automobile industry. We have found that billing with insurance relative to repairs, that's wide open. And this model can scale to that. Obviously, there would be some components that would have to be tweaked. So you have the healthcare industry, you've got the automobile industry, and then you can start getting into residential construction. Because it's a little different beast, but that represents the bulk of that $1 trillion industry. So that's $600 million every year that now we can access. And we'll continue to look at other industries to scale this into.
Paul.
To make sure I understand the revenue model.
Yes, sir.
You will charge, say, a turner. You sign them up. You will charge them a subscription fee to access your system. They will then compel their subs, because the sub won't get paid unless they can access. My guess is the reason you're doing non-residential is the sophistication of the sub will lend itself more easily to access that. I mean, people that work in houses may not even have access.
Correct.
And is there a revenue component from the sub as well, or just from Turner in that scenario?
It's actually, you're very close. It's the reverse. The turners and the developers, they don't pay anything in the banks. The subcontractor, in turn, pays about $80 a month to use the system. So the revenue model is, again, you get a developer and a general contractor to commit, then that's an automatic 20 to 30 clients using it under a contractual obligation. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Great.
Jay?
What do you think are barriers to entry for this system? You seem to highlight patent pending proprietary too much. by the time you get your patents, your business will be either taken off or gone. What do you think will help you?
Really, it's going to be a couple of things. Number one, it's all about market penetration. And I'll draw you the analogy of iPods. You know, the CEO of Apple, he was smart enough to realize that there was a whole series of MP3 players out there. So what you have to do is completely bombard the industry with your concept. Over-market, get everyone to standardize to that, and then the rest takes off. Essentially, that's what we're going to do. By targeting those top 100 general contractors and the top 50 developers, essentially the construction industry is interesting because if Turner's using it, everyone else wants to use it. If Beers is using it, everyone else wants to use it. Essentially, if those top 5 or 10 general contractors are using it, everyone getting in line saying, we need this because we need that competitive advantage. So really, it's dominating the market because the reality, and you're absolutely right, is a patent can be challenged. And we know that. And our eggs are not all in that patent. It's there to cause a moment of pause.
Can I go back? Oh, sorry. I just wanted to go back to the previous question, which is,
Yes.
So if you're going to charge the sub $80 a month,
Yes.
So all the economic difficulty falls to them. It's an easy decision for Turner because they're just not paying anything. They're going to push it down. But this has been tried in an awful lot of industries where the guy with the power, the guy at the top of the chain, tries to force the the payment structure down onto the lower guys, and it typically doesn't result in a very pretty picture. And the adoption timelines tend to drag out. A lot of fighting. Why are you going to be able to avoid that in your case?
Really, two things. One, subs will do whatever they need to get paid faster. And two, subs will do whatever they need to so they get the general contractor off their back. And if you can provide them a tool, as inexpensive as this is to them, that gets them both, they're going to want to use it. And again, the contractual obligation, that's just a carrot to get traction in the industry. That's to get everyone to know what integrated software systems is about, what e-bill is about. Once it's out there and people are realizing, wow, I'm getting paid faster, there's less stress in preparing this draw request, I have better control of my cash flow, I want to use this. And
web-based solutions to automate these kind of things have been available for a decade, and yet it hasn't really started in construction. Is there a mentality or a culture in this industry that's going to really create a problem for you in terms of the adoption?
Really, the mentality that has prevented other solutions from being successful is that auditing. No one has been able to allow the back and forth. You essentially can just submit a draw, and that's it. It sits in the queue, and it's either approved or it's rejected. What we have done is gone to the next level to say, well, you can negotiate it. You submit this value, you can hone in on a single value in that entire draw, and you can say, I don't agree with that. And this is why. And our system tracks that electronically of the who didn't agree, why they didn't agree, and their new value. And now, all of a sudden, it becomes much more of a powerful tool because now next month you can say, look, you shafted me $50,000 last month. Here's the transaction ID. I'm putting it in now. So that's where it becomes a much more robust tool.
Okay,
so that's
thanks.
why we believe that they're going to use it.
It's really along those lines because I think Tom's right. The adoption within this industry has been slower and sometimes non-existent. So I think it gets back to behavior of the actual sub. And my question is, what are you thinking about as a company? Are there services you can wrap around this product? The audit business has always been a very people-intensive product because ultimately it does get back to reading an invoice and making sure it matches with the purchase order.
Right.
How are you going to handle those disputes and issues that really are going to be outside of the technology itself?
Essentially, there's two lines of that we're approaching on. One, once this system is in the market and we've worked out all the enhancement issues, we're going to approach some very large audit firms. And one firm is going to go through and we're going to develop how this system should work, and another firm is going to audit that so we can get our audit findings. So once we're protected from that standpoint and based on the advice of our legal counsel, we're going to do what we need to essentially be able to guarantee the calculations. What's most important to a developer and to a contractor isn't necessarily the auditing. It is the ability to track the history of those negotiated values. So if you can guarantee calculations, which we can do because that's just a simple function of we set up our system and we tell a KPMG or a bearing point this is how it's supposed to work, They go through, they do intrusion control and these other things, and they spit out a findings. We're saying that you guys are of this risk, and we feel that it's an accurate system, and it does guarantee calculations. Essentially, that's going to be the important thing, is now you take that responsibility off the general contractor and the developer. They don't have to sit there and stress out over bringing a calculator. They know that that schedule of value cannot change. And if it does change, they have to write us and request in written format that it is altered, at which point we no longer can guarantee those calculations. Does that answer your question? Good.
Raj, did you?
I'm assuming that the general contractors and your developers have internal systems that you will have to interact with. What do you see barriers towards their adoption of your system?
We're trying to start off with a service-oriented architecture that allows XML to translate to each system. So we're going to have to, at some point, interview these guys and software companies to actually figure out how to exactly integrate with them. But that isn't our plan. It's in our budget as well. Does that answer your question?
Assuming that the backend software also has XML-type transactions to be able to effectively communicate with you.
Right, and we have done research to see who are the top 100 the software companies that they're using. So we have that data at this point as well.
Good, well, thank you. That leads perfectly into my question. Thank you. I was going to ask, how many of the top 100 use Sage and Timberline? And what's to stop them from extending their system, since they already own the back end, to provide this type of service?
To be quite honest with you, there is nothing that will prevent a Timberline or a Sage to say, hey, we see integrated software systems. This is great. Everyone's using it. We want to introduce it. There's nothing, to be honest with you. But what we have is proprietary patent pending technology that they're going to have to overcome that obstacle. And right now, there's going to be a time that they have to gear up to get to where we're at. And while they're gearing up, we're already selling this product. So we're going to hit the market aggressively, because the two things that are going to protect us is market domination and a moment of pause around that patent. Does that answer your question?
It does answer the second part. Just out of curiosity, what proportion of the top 100
I'm sorry.
Does use Sage?
I would say, based on our research, probably a good 30%, 30 to 40% use Timberline. Timberline is arguably, and Empower is another one. They're very easy to use accounting systems. They're very robust. They do an amazing job at Accounting 101, and it's a natural transition to interface with that. And when you look at a Timberline or an Empower, that's their focused niche, and that's what they do well in. And they don't necessarily want to come out of that because they're making tons of money doing that, and it'd be a good partnership and a good synergy with integrated software systems and those companies.
Do you feel you have a first mover advantage here, or are you more catching up with these guys and then offering something better?
We definitely have a first mover advantage, and that first mover is in that negotiation. No one offers it right now. From all the research we've had, no one offers it. And every time we've interviewed a different developer, a different general contractor, they say, look, why do we want to use this? None of these things allow you to track this stuff. And then when we show them the split screen and the negotiation, they're like, oh my gosh, when can we use this?
And that's my second question, because this, I think, is critical. If you do have first mover, how far away are you from your example of Turner? I'm assuming that was a real example.
Yes.
How far away are you from offering that product, showing all those benefits, and getting a sign-on from somebody of that size?
We're probably less than a year away. Less than a year away. Second quarter of 2008 is when we're projecting to do that.
So the biggest defense of startups is go and make it happen in the market. Okay. And you talked about that a little bit. Expand upon that a little bit. What's the experience of the team to do sales? Running a construction business with payment is one thing. Selling software business is totally different. That's the first part. The second is, what kind of validation have you done? Everyone is kind of skeptical of the slow adoption of this market.
Well, to answer your first question, my core competency is managing buildings and managing construction and managing and doing this billing. I like to think that I'm a good salesperson. But the reality is, in our plan, we plan on hiring a executive over sales and marketing, who their whole core competency is sales and marketing. You know, our model for success is surround yourself by people that are a lot smarter than you and have got 10, 20, 30 years on top of you in experience, and let them do what they do well. So essentially, we're going to mitigate that risk by getting somebody to interface along with me with these clients. To answer your second question about how are we going to, and I believe you're saying how are we going to launch this for developers. Was that your second question?
Second was validation.
Oh, the validation. Sorry. Essentially, we've talked to about, I'd say, over 12.5 different contractors and architects and developers. And essentially, there has been no negative comment made about our concept. And as a matter of fact, there's 2 major general contractors in Pittsburgh that are constantly emailing me because they want to use this. And there's 2 architectural firms out of Pittsburgh and 1 here that wants to use this, and a developer. So the word is starting to get out, and we actually have to take measures to slow that word until we can get tested into the market, because a lot of people, honestly, they're calling and they want to use this because they're trying to get time and money reduced for these projects. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Good.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question related to the, I guess, the product roadmap. And we had some earlier discussion about the other industries that you could easily transition your product into. We talked about healthcare, we talked about auto insurance claims, and we talked about the residential construction. As you look at your product roadmap, I mean, which is the next natural industry to enter into? Again, going back to the comment that was referred to earlier, being kind of the first mover in that industry. So I'm curious where you see that, quickly behind the industry that you're targeting.
Residential construction. The reality is, once you stabilize commercial, and commercial is a much more complicated beast. Once you stabilize commercial, residential is a natural transition. That will keep us busy for quite some time. The healthcare industry is even a little bit slower to adopt, and there's so many dynamics with that. That's a much longer vision. The auto industry, I think, though, is probably right after the non-residential. I'm sorry, after residential. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Great job.
Great,
thank you so much.
And again, I just want to appreciate this distinguished panel of judges, and we look forward to moving forward. And hopefully you'll see us as the winners of the competition, because this will be a catalyst, and it will be jobs for Georgia, and it will be a good thing for Georgia. I just want to again say thank you.
Integrated Software Systems, that's the 3rd of our 4 companies that will be competing this afternoon. All right, the judges will take their notes as we take a break and be back at the top of the hour with the 4th company as the 2007 GRA Tag Business Launch Competition continues.